Hi, I think my co-host Sandy has some technical issues because we can't seem to hear her that well. However, I am Farhan, and I'm from the International Islamic University of Malaysia. I'm a public health medicine specialist, and I hope all of you are in good spirit. And I know all of you have had a busy morning wherever you're from. Some of you may be at night, some of you may be in the afternoon. I would like to say Assalamualaikum, Selamat datang, welcome. Здравствуйте, Ni hao, Ahlan wa sahlan. I'm running out of languages to say hello, but I hope you guys got a picture. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope that all of you understand that today's webinar is on the World Zoonosis Day. Before we start, I'd like to do some housekeeping rules just to ensure that everybody's on the same page. Firstly, please keep your mics on mute while the speaker is presenting. And number two, when the speaker is presenting, it would be nice if the rest of you would switch off your videos so that the speaker will be the only one who is focused and highlighted. And number three, when the speaker has finished his session, you are all more than welcome to open up your videos and join us in our Q&A sessions. Now, is Dr. Sandy with us?
Hi, Dr. Fan. Thanks for starting.
Yes, we can hear you well. So I'm Farhan, and I'm let my co-host Sandy to introduce herself.
All right. Sorry if you hear some other additional sounds. My laptop just suddenly started to act crazy. That's the issue. All right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Sandy from the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, UC Malaysia Kelantan. So welcome everyone to the webinar. I'll be one of your co-hosts, co-moderators together with Dr. Pan today. So we hope everyone is doing well. Myself have a very busy morning interviewing new candidates for the next academic year. So we would like to start off introducing today's event. So for your information, World Zoonosis Day commemorates the work of the French biologist Louis Pasteur. I'm sure everyone is familiar with him. On the 6th of July, that's today, after hundreds of years, in 1885, he managed to administer the first vaccine against rabies, a zoonotic disease. So today, we are commemorating world in the aftermath of the new coronavirus, COVID-19, and there is a thought that it started in bats, then spread to pangolin, and unfortunately later on jumped into humans. So zoonosis is an infectious illness that is caused by pathogens that begins in animals and later on spread to human, either directly or indirectly through another host. So there could be a few jumps before it reached the humans. And once in humans, if like COVID-19, it started to be able to spread from human to human, that's when you get a massive pandemic. Okay. So therefore, animals has a very important critical role in maintaining the various diseases, either bacterial, viral, or even parasitic zoonotic diseases. So in the past, we have seen zoonotic diseases such as SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, MERS, and Middle East respiratory syndrome, even Ebola. And some of these diseases, they could appear and disappear like SARS, but however, some actually remain as an endemic in some parts of the world. Okay. On another note, we need to realize that reverse zoonosis also occurs, and human pathogens could also infect animals, including wildlife, livestock, and companion animals. These have led to illness, loss of production, and even death in these animals. Therefore, with such implications of those diseases, we need to work further to have the heightened research and to understand zoonosis better. Okay. So that is just a short zoonosis and world zoonosis. I think most of us are well familiar with that. I guess to officiate today's before that, today's webinar is jointly organized by MyOHUN UPM and Ministry of Health Malaysia, supported by MyOHUN and OHW NG Global Partners, and most importantly, is funded by USAID. So to officiate today's program, we'll listen to the welcoming remarks from the Director General of Health Malaysia, Tan Sri Dr. Noor Hisham Abdullah.
Salam sejahtera and a very good afternoon. For more than 130 years, preventing zoonosis remains a significant challenge. Ecosystem degradation, deforestation, agriculture intensification to meet the increasing demand for animal protein, urbanization and rapid transportation around the globe are among factors associated with new and emerging infectious diseases. Currently, at least 62% of human pathogens are zoonotic origins, such as rabies virus, ringworm, and salmonella. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic that is grappling with the world since 2020 was speculated to be originated from zoonosis. There have been reports of the SARS-CoV-2 virus spread from bats to humans, and then from there on infecting other humans. The threat of zoonotic is imminent, and its impact on the lives and the livelihood of the human race is catastrophic. This will not be the last. Therefore, it is pertinent to raise public awareness about the risks of zoonotic diseases. The World Zoonosis Day, celebrated globally on the 6th of July each year, should set us a perfect stage to start this awareness program. Ladies and gentlemen, World Zoonosis Day was initiated to commemorate the success of the first vaccination against a zoonotic disease administered by Louis Pasteur, a French biologist, on July 6, 1885. The theme for the World Zoonosis Day celebration this year is preventing the next zoonotic pandemic. It is hoped that educating the public on the risk of getting zoonotic infections will prevent the occurrence of such diseases. Even though there are urgent needs to address global problems, simple precautionary measures should be taken by every individual to avoid contracting zoonotic diseases. It should be our daily practice, such as hand washing with soap and clean water, wearing protective clothing and repellents to prevent bites from fleas, mosquitoes, and ticks, storing and handling food safely and avoiding bites and scratches from animals. I would like to express my great appreciation to everyone here for making this event a success. My sincere thanks to all the renowned speakers who contributed to sharing their knowledge, experience, and also their valuable time to make this session a fruitful one. Together, we reduce the risk of zoonotic diseases and prevent the next zoonotic pandemic. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, Tan Sri Dr. Noor Hisham Abdullah, who's also the Director General for the Ministry of Health from Malaysia. Now we have with us a lineup of esteemed speakers who are experts in the field, and surely we will have a very great informative session. Please do inform that we will have panel discussion after all speakers. Sorry, Dr. Murni, can you put your mic on mute, please? Thank you so much. So to have delivered their presentations, so do write down your questions in the chat box. And we will discussions and forward the relevant questions to the speakers. So I'm sure his name is none other than Professor Dr.
Dr. Farhan, we cannot hear you.
Hi, Dr. Pan, you are muted.
Oh, somebody muted me because I muted myself just now. Anyways, so Prof. Dr. Bruce Wilcox, who's our first speaker, is the Director of Global Health Group International, visiting professor at the Department of Entomology, K-Stat University, Thailand. He was also the adjunct professor at the Faculty of Public Health, Mahidol University, Thailand, and the Division of Infectious Disease and Global Health, Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine at Tufts University, USA, and professor of Ecology and Health, School of Medicine, University of Hawaii at Manoa, USA. Prof. Wilcox has researched extensively on global health through a transdisciplinary and ecosystem-based approach, and has published more than 150 research papers throughout his career until today. Additionally, Prof. Wilcox has served as founding chief executive and board of directors for International Association for Ecology and Health, IAEH, and founding editor-in-chief, which is an international journal that addresses the interface and sustainability of ecology, human and veterinary health. He has contributed his expertise as technical advisors and consultancy to numerous organizations such as the WHO, disease and risk. Thank you very much. Let me turn Prof. Wilcox to start off his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Let me start to share my, let me put my PowerPoint up. And all right. So I'm very happy to be here. Welcome everybody around the world. I'm going to be talking about a very complicated problem and try to cover it in a very short time. So therefore, I'm just going to focus on highlights. As you can see, the subtitle is really the important issue here on this slide. It's the problem of zoonotic disease risk management. And the point of the subtitle is that we don't have such a science yet. We're still working on it, or we can say we have one, but it's in its infancy. I will touch on the concept of ecosystem, biodiversity, and to understand this problem of risk. I'll in particular be drawing on the following publication, which just came out a few months ago, which is in, as you can see below, it's in the Handbook of Global Health. It's a World Health Organization and Springer published book. And this is a chapter, a fairly long chapter, it's about 60 pages. And so this chapter represents about 20 years of work, I would say, but we had to put it together in less than a year. So if you find any little errors here and there, please let us know. But there will be a second and third editions of this. So this publication, which is, as you can see, available, it's available online, and you can see the information down there, the how to find it. Really covers a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about. And let me just point to, or let me just mention that while One Health is in the chapter and in the chapter heading there, and it is just one of several terms that has been used over many years, beginning with One Medicine, of course, conservation medicine, eco health, ecosystem health, and now we have planetary health. So a question we have to ask is, are these sciences? What are these? Are these disciplines? Well, no, they're not. They're just simply names that were devised, often related to a program or a project or a donor-driven set of activities, etc. So the problem we've had is, how do we actually operationalize these as sciences? And this has been the challenge we've been facing all these years. Now, One Health is a little more interesting and perhaps has gained more traction because it focuses more explicitly on not only on zoonotic diseases and the problem of disease emergence, but on the whole issue of the so-called human-animal environment interface. And so I'll be talking a fair amount about that, because the challenge for us with One Health is that while about 15 years ago, when the concept first emerged, it was made very clear that we need to focus on this so-called human-animal environment interface. But what is the human-animal environment interface? How do you measure that you're doing that? In addition, it also often many of these proponents and the people who started the field often pointed out that One Health, like EcoHealth, needs to be ecosystem focused. It needs to be both interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary and so on. But the problem we've had is that no one ever specified exactly how you know you're doing it. How do you know that you're actually conducting research or an intervention that actually deals with the human-animal environment interface? What is the human environmental interface? What is the science behind that? And how do we know that we're appropriately and adequately drawing on that science? So this is about largely what this paper, this chapter is about. And I ask you to please refer to it if you wish to know more about what I'll be talking about. But I need to jump in and move through this fairly quickly. I just wanted to touch on something. In fact, it's in the chapter. There are various types of zoonoses. We're hearing about pandemic zoonoses most of all today, obviously, and that's the last on the list. We're old zoonoses, that would include HIV, which originated as a new zoonoses, emerging zoonoses, which could include pandemic zoonoses, and then epidemic and endemic zoonoses. It turns out that besides the pandemic zoonoses, these other kinds of zoonoses actually, even today, this year normally, may actually account for more mortality and morbidity than even the single pandemic zoonosis of COVID-19, as bad as that is. So pandemic zoonoses don't contribute the major health burden. They're extremely episodic, but they are catastrophic in the extent to how they impact economies and so on. I want to remind you, this is not the first period of time we've had emerging zoonoses. Of course, throughout history, going way back. This is from McNeil's Plagues and Peoples, which I highly recommend you should read. He can define a number of periods of emergence or eras of emergence going back almost 100,000 years, well, probably going beyond 100,000 years, because now we know the human species is older than 100,000 years. But as a result of systematic, if you actually could say, ecosystem changes that have taken place throughout human history. And of course, the seventh episode is what McNeil was describing that in about 1976 when he first wrote this book. But today we're dealing with this. The seventh, basically, he pointed out, was really partly a consequence of modern medical interventions, which actually lead to more problems with microbes, often because of the problems of resistance to and microbial resistance and vector disease, vector resistance, and so on. But major accomplishments were achieved. But these interventions often just simply alter the ecological conditions which allow pathogens to further adapt. So basically, by the 1970s and 80s, global environmental change had dramatically changed everything about the ecology and evolution of microbes. So the present episode is the 8th era of disease emergence. This has been called also the third epidemiological transition. I won't go into that, but you can refer to the paper down below. What we see here is again and again and again reference to ecology, in this case, globalization of human disease ecologies. So back in 1992, there was the organization of a set of panels instituted mainly or begun mainly under the leadership of Joshua Lederberg, one of the greatest microbiologists of modern times, who now has since passed away. And these two books, which are really bookends in a series of books that reports that came out of the Institute of Medicine of the United States, starting in '92 and ending in 2003. These are rather important because they lay down they describe the whole problem of emerging diseases, which of course mostly are zoonoses. And so these are, by the way, these are free online should you want to get them. But by 2003, which is the book on the right, Lederberg and others pointed out that a new scientific approach is needed. It must be interdisciplinary and combine social and ecological thinking and it must be participatory, whatever that is. So we also saw that the explicit definition of zoonosis, or emerging infectious diseases, which applies to emerging zoonotic diseases too. I won't read it to you, but you can see this is the definition provided in this paper by Steve Morse, who was a mentee of Joshua Lederberg. And so we actually now have a new definition, a new type of microbe, an emerging infectious microbe, if you want to, or agent. And that started, of course, this is in the early 90s. So the key elements that came out of this really are, they identified the notion of emergence factors. In 2003, the Institute of Medicine assessment recategorized the earlier assessment. They came up with 13 individual factors belonging to a number of categories. We now have added a 14th, and you can see them in table 3 in the document of the chapter I described this in the Global Health, the Handbook for Global Health. The one that was added, interestingly, is the commodification of the health system, which is very important. I'll talk about that a little more in a second. Secondly, the key element here to understanding risk management is the emergence process. So after the IOM reports, after 2003, a number of researchers were able to begin elaborating on the so-called zoonotic disease emergence process. Notably is the chapter by Jamie Childs in a 2007 document describing 4 transition stages, and also recent work by Plowright that we summarize in the section of our chapter called Causes and Drivers of Emerging Zoonoses. So I recommend highly that you take a look at that section at least. Finally, the third element that's needed is a systems framework. When we say systems, in our case, I will argue we need an ecosystems framework, or we could call it a social ecological systems framework. The other thing is it must accommodate complexity. It must incorporate recent discoveries and recognition of the zoonotic disease emergent systems as so-called complex adaptive systems. They aren't the kind of systems we're used to working on in the laboratory and the clinic. So they require new thinking, new approaches, and new tools in order to operationalize our interventions. So I want to point back to the emergence factors. The 14th factor that we added was the commodification, as I point out, the commodification of the health system. One of the dramatic changes that has taken place in the last 20 years is this, is the tremendous amount of investment and potential financial gains offered by therapeutic drugs and vaccines. And with many medical researchers and global health philanthropists, people like Bill Gates, as the beneficiaries financially. So this has introduced a tremendous amount of bias and potential conflicts of interest, as we've seen, for example, with the COVID-19 problem, that there's so many people in the virology community and related scientific communities that are at risk in terms of their financial funding and their careers and so on, if they take certain positions. And so this has introduced a tremendous problem for us in this whole area of risk management of zoonoses. So one of the things that came out of the 2003 book was this so-called disease emergence, the model called the convergence model. And the idea was that you had these 4 categories of factors, which you can see here. I won't read them out. You can see them in this box, in this figure. And what I just want to point to the fact that what the authors of this report said was that these converge, all these factors converge, and what's in the middle here is a black box, suggesting that we don't really know what goes on in this black box. However, as I mentioned before, subsequently to this report, Jamie Childs and his colleagues and others had begun to work out these details. And that's pretty important for us because of what I'll point out in a second. So Lederberg pointed out, and he's clearly one of the greatest thinkers in modern history and science, he basically pointed out this need for a new paradigm. And they even produced a workshop called Ending the War Metaphor Against Microbes. this is an important set of ideas because he pointed out basically we have this situation which humans, animals, and plants and microbes are all part of this planet. They're all co-inhabitants. And we've created these instabilities of this cohabitation. And these instabilities arise from ecological and evolutionary processes. So in the way we alter the biological and physical environment. So what he recommended is we really have to take a different approach. We really can't take a top-down approach where we're going to try to eliminate all microbes. Not going to work because microbes are part of us, of course, a part of our, for example, our microbiome is key to our health. So they tried to, in these reports, Lederberg in particular was trying to guide scientists into a broader way of thinking and rethinking about the whole issue of infectious diseases and certainly emerging infectious diseases. So what they were really trying to say is that medical and public health sciences and knowledge or thinking, how we think, is essential, but it actually is not sufficient to expose what's happening inside that disease emergence black box in the previous figure. And secondly, that disciplinary or knowledge integration is required. That is integration of knowledge, meaning theories, concepts, principles, and so on, that combine clinical and community medicine with epidemiology, microbiology, ecology, evolutionary biology, and something that's often called ecosystemology, which you haven't heard much, but there's actually quite a remarkable description of that. It's really not enough to know ecology. There's a whole field of understanding the idea of what an ecosystem is, both as an abstract and concrete concept. And I keep referring you to a book by Neva and Lieberman called Landscape Ecology, in which they describe the whole history of the emergence of ecosystem thinking as it led to into the late 1990s, and has evolved since, by the way. So basically, the ecosystem concept is essential for framing the problem of emerging zoonotic diseases. We know probably more than 75% of infectious diseases are zoonotic. Involves a multitude of social and ecological factors and forces, mechanisms, so on. So basically, you cannot avoid this kind of thinking, and you cannot avoid ecological knowledge in general. So, for example, in the case of vector-borne diseases, we see that they evolve across landscapes over time, and this involves ecological and evolutionary phenomena across landscape transitions. So all ecosystems, urban, natural, agro, and so on, we can call them complex. They're human natural systems. They're coupled human natural systems, and they're also so-called complex adaptive systems. This is a category of systems that does not include what we work on in the lab or the clinic. The human body is not, as a whole, a complex adaptive system. It's not self-organizing like a city or like a forest. It's not like the climate system. It develops according to a blueprint. There are components of the human or the vertebrate body that are complex systems like the immune system. But overall, a whole set of other issues need to be brought into play when thinking about complex adaptive systems. So something is going on here with, sorry about this, somebody is in and then it changed my whole, let me see if I can go. No. I'm going to have to come out and go back for a second. I'm stuck here. I can't move apologize, but some change took place. Now I can't move my.
There's a little pencil on the bottom.
People are asking to annotate the content, and every time I do that, I can't then I can't change. Yeah, I have someone is people are asking to annotate, And then when I approve, then I can't move forward. I'm unable to go out or go in or anything. Eddie, can you help with that? Or
I think you can click on the little pencil on the bottom left of the screen, and you should be able
yeah.
to go to the next slide.
No, I can't do anything. Yeah, it's not responding. Well, let me try. Okay, maybe that did it. No. Yeah, something is going on here. I don't know what it is that has changed. Okay, let me try this. So the point here is that ecosystems we all live in ecosystems. Zoonotic diseases are part of ecosystems. The transmission systems in which they adapt and evolve are all one. So there is, and there has been over a long period of time during the 1980s and 90s, the development of something called the ecosystem approach, which is applicable here. In fact, originally, EcoHealth, the original paper that described the program EcoHealth that IDRC ran, it was to apply an ecosystem approach to health generally. However, that hasn't always taken place. But in any case, there is a very large literature on this whole ecosystem approach. However, this has evolved since the 90s to incorporate the notion of coupled human natural systems and more sophisticated kinds of tools and research to help understand this concept of complexity applied to human coupled natural systems. So let me move on to the next slide. So basically, a different way of thinking has been called for, and it began really in the 1970s and 80s with two books on the left you see here on adaptive management that was introduced. And then finally, by 2003, the term so-called social ecological systems was adopted, but it was building on the original work of Holling and others that provide the basis of ecosystem approach in the 80s and 90s. So I refer you to these rather important books. We draw heavily on these in understanding how to understand, including manage the risk of zoonoses. So one of the ways to think about this is that ecosystems are organized, the large ecosystem, the whole biosphere is organized in this way across different time and space scales, with individuals embedded into populations embedded in ecological communities, those into landscapes, that into biomes and regional ecosystems, and also. So the difficulty here with understanding disease emergence is to be able to tie together dynamics across these vast scales of space and time, fast and small variables in the lower left, and slow and large ones in the upper right. And so part of the ecosystem or the social ecological systems approach is to understand how processes operating on these different scales interact to help regulate disease emergence. Another way of looking at this is to see that basically any particular, say, focal outbreak involves a kind of an embedded system beginning at the local focal area, the local, the landscape, regional, and then global. And so there are all these different factors which come into play that would need to be considered when thinking about zoonotic disease risk management. So we have these on the upper right, you can see we have contextual determinants, and these are distal factors, and then we have the more proximal factors, all the way down to the very lower level, host-parasite relations, transmission cycles, and so on. So I won't read this, but I think you can see that different factors are involved at different levels. And so risk management needs to include all of these things, but all of them considered together in a synergistic way. So it involves many different kinds of analysis, from political science to disease ecology and microbiology. So we've had more than a decade worth of projects called EcoHealth or One Health, which I'll have to say, unfortunately, have been variable at best. a paper was produced a few years ago by a number of my colleagues and myself, looking at all the projects that have been funded mainly by IDRC, thus called EcoHealth in Southeast Asia. And we really couldn't find any consistency as to whether and how they actually measured the degree to which they were actually applying an ecosystem approach. And the problem had been that there were no specific criteria. It's not enough to say, take an ecosystem approach or use transdisciplinarity or what have you. Criteria need to be defined so that we can develop metrics to measure the extent to which we're actually doing such an approach. So another paper was published a little after that, where we made an attempt to first define operational criteria. And this would apply both to One Health or EcoHealth, but the idea of applying transdisciplinarity to the ecosystem approach. And this was a step forward, but we still have more work to do. This would allow us, by the way, to actually develop metrics to assess the performance of a project and the degree to which it is, in theory, addressing a problem of risk management in what we know to be best practice and based on the science at the time. In the end, it looks something like this. This is just a schemata in which basically one is integrating knowledge, one is focusing on something called problem orientation, which means in a transdisciplinary sense, there's no one single perspective or worldview or discipline that is allowed to dominate. And all possible hypotheses need to be on the table and perspectives. And that's a requirement for us addressing these complex system problems because they are a moving target. The system is itself changing. The players are changing. Those researchers are changing. So in order to actually have adaptation to achieve the goal of ecosystem management is adaptive management. It needs to be continually changing and evolving based on the system's thinking. So this is just a simple schematic of the kinds of steps one would go through, needs to go through in order to carry out a transdisciplinary process that attempts to achieve adaptive management, meaning management of zoonotic disease risk. So finally, let me conclude by saying that we are now in the process of taking this further by actually working out details of how one does this, how one actually can measure the performance that a project is achieving in the extent to which they're actually applying these concepts. There is a WHO-sponsored program focused mainly in Africa that we're involved with that is attempting to apply something called implementation research. Implementation research, these are methods, or it's a form of methodological research carried out in the real world in complex system context that employs something called logic models. So the idea of implementation research is to understand how and why interventions fail or succeed to achieve the expected outcomes. And finally, this WHO program its overall aim is to combine implementation research methodologies with adaptive management, as you saw above, in an attempt to identify the uncertainties and test hypotheses about disease transmission dynamics by employing intervention tools to change the system. So just to end here, the idea is that the nature of ecosystems and coupled human natural systems, they are inherently unpredictable. But it is possible to manage that unpredictability by using these kinds of tools and essentially embracing complexity. But it's an entirely new way of thinking, different from how all of us were trained. And so it requires new training. And so this WHO program, for example, will be also adding an e-learning platform that people will join around the world so that we'll have people who begin to understand how to manage EcoHealth, One Health, or whatever project that is attempting to manage emerging zoonotic disease risk. So with that, let me end here, so we have enough time for questions, perhaps now or later. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Prof. Wilcox. We'll have the panel discussion later after all the speakers have presented their talk. Right. Thanks, Prof. Wilcox. That was a very enlightening presentation. I'm sure the attendees, actually, I'm already seeing questions are coming in. So be patient and stay with us. So please note that we are broadcasting live on FB page of Malaysia One Health UC Network. So if you have friends or colleagues that are unable to register before this, so they are welcome to watch this live on Facebook as well. Okay, so next, second speaker is Prof. Dr. Latifah Hassan. She's a professor in the Veterinary Public Health Epidemiology at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, UC Putra, Malaysia, UPM. She has graduated with DVM at UPM and later received a doctorate degree from Cornell University, US. Her research covers the areas of epidemiology of emerging infections, especially those of public health concern. Prof. Latifah publishes widely and have served in editorial boards of top-ranking academic journals. She's still contributing much to all these journals. She's an avid speaker for One Health and facilitates multiple inter-agency trainings in the country. Obviously, because she has been regularly invited to speak at the national and international seminars and conferences, and is definitely a familiar face at interagency meetings and platforms. She's now for veterinary laboratory diagnostics at UPM, and we'll lovingly know her as the coordinator of Malaysia One Health University Network. So, Prof. Latifah will speak to us on the prioritization of zoonotic diseases in the preparedness to prevent the next pandemic. So, please welcome, Prof.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sandy. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good afternoon, very good evening, very good morning, wherever you are. I understood that we have people from countries that begin with from A to Z. So welcome to MyOHUN organized activity for World Zoonosis Day, and thank you KKM for inviting me today. I'm very, very privileged to be talking. I was given this topic by my colleagues at Ministry of Health, and I have to be honest and say that I am not the authority to be talking about this topic. But Prof. Wilcox assured me that nobody is the expert and everybody is just learning about this as we gain new information, and the world has not seen pandemic as it has with COVID-19. So I'll try my best. So I'm just sharing information, whatever that I have heard from conversation I had with people who are familiar with this area, and also from my reading of various literatures and journals. So very roughly, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is preparedness, zoonotic disease and prioritization, why do we need to prioritize and how to prioritize, and challenges and what is to come. I actually have more questions than I do before I started with this presentation. I do not have all the answers. I do not think anybody has all the answers, but this is where we come here together so that we can learn from each other. So in 2017, Time declared on that we are not ready for the next pandemic on a hyper-connected planet rife with hyper-infectious diseases. Experts has warned us that we are not ready to keep the world safe from the next pandemic. That was in 2017. And we also have heard from Prof. Wilcox about Dr. Joshua Lederberg. He's a Nobel laureate. He was quoted by CDC in 1994. He said that the microbe that felled one child in a distant continent yesterday can reach yours today and seed a global pandemic tomorrow. So basically a disease is just one flight away. So if you're thinking that something that hits the continent of Africa yesterday will not reach us today, then we have to do some serious rethinking. In a memorable 2015 TED Talk, Bill Gates told his audience that when I was a kid, the disaster we worried most it was nuclear war. But today, he said, if anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war, not missiles, but microbes. So here we are today, about 4 million deaths due to COVID-19 and about 200 million cases worldwide. According to this article, I have no idea whether this is scientific or not, COVID-19 caused more in 2020 than the world's combined natural disaster in any of the past 20 years. And according to this estimation that COVID-19 so far, people have not truly gotten all the data that they need to do this kind of estimation, but the estimate is that so far it has cost the world $24 trillion US. And with that, we have, along with pandemic COVID-19, we have shadow pandemic, which includes also violence against women and children during the pandemic. And many people gain a lot of money. There's new millionaires around the world, and it's actually to a large degree may not be a good thing just because it widens the already significant gap between the rich and the poor. Yes. Okay, so what is preparedness? My favorite book, The Deadliest Enemy, Our War Against Killer Germs by Dr. Michael Osterholm and Mark Allshaker, said that a dot is just that, an isolated person, a bacterium, a virus, parasite, place or time. But a bunch of dots begins to form a line if they become organized by chance or by design. So it is our job to see that dots before they become a line and do whatever must so that that line never materializes. So this is what preparedness is all about. The term preparedness refers to the ability of government, professional response organization, communities, and individuals to anticipate and respond effectively to the impact of likely, imminent, or current hazards, events, or conditions. It means putting in place mechanisms which will allow national authorities and relief organizations to be aware of risk and deploy staff and resources quickly once a crisis strikes. So to prioritize zoonotic diseases is not something that is easy to do just because there are so many zoonotic diseases in the world. And it is very hard to dictate what needs to be prioritized as disease distribution, prevalence, impact vary with regions of the world. So prioritization has to be performed at the local level through vigorous interministerial exercise using certain methods or tools to assist in the prioritization. I know, for example, Malaysia have developed or drafted their strategic action plan for zoonoses. I'm not sure what methodology was used, but perhaps by looking at my presentation today, based on what I have read, I haven't done this, but I've read several papers using these different methods. Maybe then later when the action plan is to be improved, these methods can be visited and we can help polish or refine the methods used to draw the strategic action plan before. So I want to draw your attention to this about the global trends in emerging infectious disease. This is a little bit outdated by Jones in Nature, which was published in 2008. But I think if we were to look at the trends of disease occurrence till today, you will see very consistent trends. And if we were just to draw this all the way to 2020, you'll probably see similar trends. So let me show you direct you a little bit. This is number of, I hope you can see my pointer right here, number of EID events and the pathogen causing the events. Prof. Wilcox just now reminded us that we have to also remember that other than the sporadic pandemic, which could be spectacular in its presentation and in its reach, there are other insidious or like less prominent or a lot more quiet type of zoonotic epidemic or outbreaks that occur consistently enough, which actually causes more impact compared to these sporadic events. So looking at the decades, you'll see here that most of the events is due to bacteria and viruses, so the black and the white. So a large proportion of that is because of that too. Okay, and you also can see perhaps a little bit right here that the trends for viruses is actually increasing in terms of causing emerging infectious disease. Now, this emerging infectious disease may not necessarily be zoonotic. So if you're looking at whether the emerging disease is zoonotic or not, and about 60 to 70% of emerging infectious disease are zoonotic. So yes, I'm sorry. Is there a problem?
No problem.
Okay, thank you.
Very good, Prof. Please proceed.
Thank you very much. So if there is, this is just to show you that most of the disease, this black is non-zoonotic and the white, red, and yellow are zoonotic events. And from that portion, most of it is actually from wildlife. So later, Mr. Tom Hughes will be talking about the work that he's doing with wildlife in terms of disease surveillance and trying to basically place in our database the type of pathogens that we do have circulating in our wildlife. Also, more importantly, a large number of the EID is due to, in terms of proportion of increasing, due to drug-resistant pathogens. So these are, antimicrobial resistant pathogens, which is a big worry and also a huge global health threat, but there's no face to it. So people often forget about AMR. So as a country, we should never forget about AMR. And also disease that are vector-borne or non-vector-borne. So more than 335 infectious diseases emerged between 1940 and 2004. The number of new diseases per decade has increased nearly fourfold over the past 60 years. And since 1980, a number of outbreaks per year has more than tripled. So this is the diseases, and it's not even all the diseases that has occurred throughout the world since 1990. So you see that there is almost every 5 years, there's some new outbreaks of emerging zoonotic disease. It could be new, it could be like has been around for a while and then suddenly just increasing in terms of its presentation and magnitude. And as you know, that drivers for zoonotic pandemic is multifactorial. That's why it is so challenging and so difficult to tackle. So which requires, again, like what Prof. Wilcox mentioned, the approach using One Health, which kind of like get everybody to be involved and is transdisciplinary and connects all the different elements of the human health, animal health, environment health at the same time. So the emergence of several zoonotic diseases over the past 2 decades calls for updated global systemic surveillance program in wildlife, and re-evaluation of current disease control programs is crucial not to forget about other zoonotic pandemic threats. Okay. So while everybody is still occupied with COVID-19, several outbreaks of zoonotic diseases did not gain much attention from international scientific community. For example, there's an ongoing Ebola virus outbreak in Congo, has been going on for the past 2 years without any reported cases in that region of the country. And then in 2020 also, there has been outbreaks of Lassa virus infection reported in Nigeria. And then several novel strains of zoonotic avian influenza virus have continuously evolved as reported in many countries. So that's the report on new Ebola outbreak detected in Congo. That's the Lassa fever outbreak in Nigeria, which has been happening since early 2021. And we have HPI outbreaks in animals, and then you have the low-path avian influenza events in animals, and the number of human cases reported due to the infection from these AI viruses of pandemic potential. So if you see here, showing the global distribution of AIV with zoonotic potential since October 2020. So all the little dots, these are distribution of the various subtypes of HPI and LPAI, the low path. And if you were to look just a year before that, which is October 2019 to September 30th, 2020, you saw that actually the amount of cases were quite localized, but of course in 1 year everything has spread throughout and crossing continents. So if it's something that we want to look out for, it has to be influenza and perhaps avian influenza. And looking at this, it seems that H5N8 seems to be making an impression. So the scientists give characteristics of viruses with pandemic potential, and they name coronaviruses, influenza, and Henipaviruses as those with the likelihood of being the next candidate causing the possible pandemic. That will not happen. Okay, so but according to movie, one aspect that signals pandemic potential are RNA rather than DNA genome, because the process of copying RNA typically doesn't include a proofreader like DNA replication does. This means that they can change and become more adaptable to human infection and human transmission. And recently, we were quite shocked. Actually, I learned it from my friend in the US about the new type of coronavirus originating in dogs found in a study, and that location was Sabah. And this was based on survey work that was done in 2017, 2018, finding humans with pneumonia actually having coronavirus, which is very similar to canine coronavirus. Again, even though a lot of talks about virus, we cannot be neglecting or not thinking about other pathogen that causes continuous epidemic in the community, which includes the bacteria and also the antimicrobial resistant pathogens. So why do you need to prioritize? It enables effective capacity building and resource allocation, improve preparedness and respond, and enhance laboratory capacity and surveillance at the animal-human interface, and allows for rapid detection, response, and to control zoonotic diseases at their source. In low resource settings, capacity building efforts should be initially focused on a few key diseases. Okay, so I'm going to skip that just because for the respect of time. So I'm not sure how many of people are familiar with this, but CDC has a One Health Zoonotic Disease Prioritization Process tool. It's called the OHZDP tool, which is a multi-sector approach to rank countries' zoonotic diseases using an objective semi-quantitative method. So this method has been adopted by several countries when they were trying to determine and trying to prioritize zoonotic diseases in their country to do surveillance and to allocate limited resources. So this is, I think, is a very useful tool, and I've read the publication and also the multiple publication that was performed, that was published by countries that has undergone this process. So for example, the one that was done in Kenya, So they prioritize and weight different criteria based on scores, and they rank it. And it's a very it's a kind of like an iterative process with some objectivity and semi-quantitatively done. So in the end, they managed to rank priority disease list for Kenya by with ranking by criteria and normalized final scores. So there's some scoring and some quantitative kind of like calculation that was involved. So this is their rank. And another tool that is available, and this was just published in 2021, is called the multi-criteria decision analysis, and this was done in Belgium. It's very comprehensive. This is more intensive and delve more into data. It's quite data-driven. So, I think they were done by a bunch of researchers as well in collaboration with their ministry. So this one is also an iterative process and involve different stages of doing things. But in the end, this is how they prioritize, and they classify disease diagnosis in priority groups according to weighted score and displayed in ranked order. And so in the end, they managed to set very high priority. These are basically for Belgium. These are their diseases. High priority, these are their diseases, and so on and so forth. So therefore, they can allocate their resources to concentrating on very high and high priority diseases. So I'm a researcher, I'm an academician, so I cannot do away without talking a little bit about the priority of research in zoonosis. However, I have to say that a lot of times among academicians, and I am one, a lot of times we do things that we is important. It's not necessarily because it is truly important. So I think for countries like Malaysia, it will be a great idea to engage academicians, and Malaysia One Health University Network can definitely assist in this, to engage very closely Malaysia to do operational and functional kind of research that the ministry basically need to support their decision making. So, and this is, I was just showing you the tools that India did on their roadmap to zoonosis, and this is collaborative work between the ministry and the academician. And in the end, they managed to prioritize disease for research, which will contribute to the prioritization of disease in India to focus resources and surveillance work. So what are the challenges? Malaysia, we have MySet, which has been published, and this follows closely with the Asia Pacific Strategy for Emerging Diseases and Public Health Emergencies. And National Strategic Plan on Zoonosis actually is aligned with the MySet too. So the challenges, as with anything that is written up by any countries around the world, for the reminder, international organization, they have worked together with countries to put out these cross-sectorial strategies and action plan. So, so basically on paper, most countries have some type of plan for public health emergencies, which would include zoonotic diseases. However, many of these strategies face multiple challenges with minimum or lack of proper funding, and none or lethargic transformative supporting ecosystem that would enable the strategies to be fully executed. I'm not talking about Malaysia. I'm not talking about any countries right here. I'm just saying, I'm just referring things in general. This is based on what I heard from talks given by World Bank about how many strategies and action plan around the world that has been printed but never funded. So basically, we need political will and to ensure finances to this cause, and we need trans-agency willingness to transform in a different than traditional way. So because resources are constrained by finite capital, limited available skilled and unskilled workers, and it's time-bound. So disease prioritization in animal and human health will be motivated by the need to ensure that allocation of limited resources is targeted to achieve the greatest benefit in improving and maintaining human and animal health, in addition to ensuring preparation for looming disease threat. So I just wanted to show you this. There's a lot of work on predicting the next pandemic, and then there's a lot of sponsorship and funding about on trying to create a library of all possible viruses out there. But according to this publication by this author, is that for countries that perhaps do not have enough resources to do all that, and doing all that is actually really expensive, please spend on surveillance and not prediction, right? So how are we prepared for the pandemic? COVID-19 has increased global and local preparedness, but has our healthcare system changed very much from COVID-19 experiences? Do we have a plan of actions for securing and ensuring adequate PPE, vaccine, and pharmaceuticals? Is there appropriate infrastructure in place for rapid dissemination and exchange of data and materials? Can we prepare for extensive testing for a new pathogen that is currently unknown? Is our system robust enough to sustain the capacity to treat common infections during a pandemic? Do we have enough manpower and human capacity to prevent and to face the next pandemic? No one of us does anything worthwhile on our own. We are all in this together. So those are my references. I know I'm out of time. I apologize. Thank you. And I want to take this opportunity, because I have so many of you in the audience, to thank you to the frontliners. Thank you for your service to the country. And if you are not in Malaysia, if you are frontliners, thank you so much for all your service.
Thank you so much, Prof. Latifah, for that informative session. I see there are already questions coming in. I hope you guys can let the questions flow through. At the end of all the speakers, we will be addressing the sessions. So we're going to jump right through to the third speaker, which is Madam Teresa Yong Sui Min, Head of Center Health Communication and Informatics Research Center, Institute for Health Behavioral Research, National Institute of Health Malaysia. Teresa has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia, who later obtained a postgraduate degree in health education from the Public Health Institute. She has also served the Ministry of Health for more than 20 years, stationed at multiple offices throughout Malaysia, including district, state, and national offices. Throughout her career, Teresa has worked tirelessly to educate health and knowledge, attitude, and practices of Malaysian public on various critical health issues and illnesses, and ultimately including zoonoses, particularly on COVID-19, cancer, and reproductive health. Teresa's expertise and knowledge has contributed in the writing of the National Health and Mobility Survey 2019 technical report, describing the risk factors and other health problems related to non-communicable diseases in Malaysia. And today, Teresa will share about dog-mediated zoonotic diseases, findings from the National and Health Mobility Survey 2020. Without further ado, Madam Teresa, please. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Farhan. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Yeah. Okay, I will start off my presentation. I will share about the findings on the National Health Mobility Survey done in 2020. And this National Health Mobility Survey focuses on communicable disease, and one of the module is dog-mediated disease, which I conduct. Why dogs? Because dogs, there are rabies cases in Malaysia, and the number of rabies cases in Malaysia from 2017 to 2020 recorded 31 cases. Meanwhile, number of rabies deaths in Malaysia from 2017 to 2020 recorded 29 cases. And dogs have been known as human companions. Yes.
Teresa, are you sharing your slides?
Yes. Sorry. Yeah. Can you all see?
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay. Why the study on dogs is because of the rabies cases, and dogs have been known as human companions, and the close physical contact that indirectly expose human beings with pet-associated zoonotic disease through direct contact, through bites and scratch, or indirect contact through animal saliva, urine or body fluids, and ingestion of animal fecal. What is the main objective of this study is to assess the knowledge, perception, and behavior of the general population on zoonotic diseases related to dogs. I'll be touching on the 3 domains, which is the cognitive, the affective, and the behavioral. For the cognitive domain, the study is to assess the knowledge on diseases related to dogs, particularly on rabies, among the general population, to assess the awareness on Animal Welfare Act 2015 among the general population. Meanwhile, for the affective, the perception section, we are assessing the perception regarding the risk factors of contracting dog-related diseases. The behavioral component, we study on identifying good health-seeking behavior among those who had been bitten or scratched by dog within the past 1 year, and those who have never been bitten or scratched by dogs, but given the circumstances, if they have been bitten, what will be their reactions? Number 2 is to assess the dog owner's ownership and responsibility on pet. And number 3 is to identify the dog owner's practices on personal hygiene when they had contact with their pets. And as for the non-dog owners' practices on personal hygiene when they had contact with dog within the last 3 months. And this survey uses a cross-sectional survey with complex survey analysis and using 2-stage stratified random sampling. Through that, they have identified 113 enumeration blocks, which covers about 2,260 living quarters. And this study actually has a lot of methods, but for my case, for this study, I'm focusing more on the CAB survey, which is comprises of respondents age 13 years and above, and the eligible respondents are 5,564 and 4,588 participated. The survey instrument for this CAB, cognitive, affective, and behavioral, consists of 2 components, that is the dengue and zoonoses, but I am focusing on zoonoses. For the demography, it consists of 21 questions. The cognitive, the knowledge parts consists of 11 questions. The affective and perception consists of 8 questions, and behavioral aspects, there are a lot of questions, but I covered 3 aspects. On the overall respondents, the social demographic characteristic, there are 4,588 respondents. Majority are more in the urban, and female are the majority respondents. As for the age group, 20 to 29 years, which consists of 19.5%, are the most respondents who participated in this study. Meanwhile, for ethnicity, Malays had the most. As for the educational level, most of them are from the secondary education, and those who own dogs only consist of 6%. Okay, I will go to the cognitive domain, which is to assess the knowledge on diseases related to dogs. Particularly, this section will study more on rabies among the general population. This subset is to able to identify diseases transmitted by dog, the sign and symptoms, risk factor, modes of transmission, and what are the necessary remedial preventive measures need to be observed. From this cognitive domain, we classify the level of knowledge based on the Bloom cutoff point, whereby the high level of knowledge is within 80% to 100%. And this is the overall findings, that is 46.4% scored a high level of knowledge. If I'm to compare to other countries, all these are from the literature review from 2020, which is the same year where the study was conducted. It is almost comparable to Uganda, which is 44%, Bangladesh 53%, and Ethiopia 56.1%. And from the knowledge domain, actually, there are those respondents who scored less than 60% are dog scratch cannot transmit disease to human. 2 is if bitten by a dog, the wound should be washed with soap and running water for at least 15 minutes. And the third one is tetanus booster shot is one of the treatments given for dog bites. As for the socio-demographic findings, high level of knowledge prevalence shown among the rural, the female, 50 to 59 years old, Malay and Bumiputra, tertiary education, and non-dog owners. As for the cognitive domain, I also cover the assessed the Awareness on Animal Welfare Act 2015 among the general population, whereby there are only 2 questions. That is whether the respondents are aware of the Animal Welfare Act 2015. And out of the 5 laws under the Animal Welfare Act, I only looked into one component, that is cruelty towards animals. And out of that, the findings show that high level of awareness prevalence on the Animal Welfare Act 2015 are among the rural, female, 60 to 69 years old, tertiary education, Indian, non-dog owners. Actually, there are only 28% are aware of this Animal Welfare Act. But if you look at the findings by social demo, there are high level of awareness prevalence on the cruelty among those who are cruel to animals, among the rural, female, 60 to 69 years old, Malay, and dog owners. And out of that, 75.3% are aware of this question. As for the effective domain is to assess the perception regarding the risk factors of contracting dogs-related disease. This covers more than rabies, actually, able to indicate the level of concern on the severity of diseases transmitted by dog, zoonotic disease risk, disease preventive behavior, and treatment seeking. And we also base on the Bloom cutoff point, whereby we classify it into 3 levels of perception, whereby positive is also from 80% to 100%. And on the prevalence of the community, 53.1% show positive perception regarding the risk factors of the contracting dog-related diseases. And if I am to compare with the same studies done in 2020 in other countries, it is a bit lower in Sri Lanka, which it consists of 25%, but Ethiopia and Philippines, Ethiopia 56.2, meanwhile Philippines 25.3, which is a bit higher than the findings in Malaysia. As for the high level of perception, it is more among the female, Malays, tertiary education, 60 to 69 years old, non-dog owners. Okay, I go to the next behavioral domain. Number 1 is to identify the good health seeking behavior among those who had been bitten or scratched by dog within the past 1 year. And we also look into those who have not bitten by dog, and even given the circumstances, if they are being bitten, what will be their reactions? And I classify into correct immediate action based on the interim guideline for human rabies prevention and control in Malaysia. Those who have done correct seeking behavior are classified it into 3. They must fulfill these 3 steps, that is, apply antiseptic ointment or wound dressing. Number 2 is wash wound using running water and soap for at least 15 minutes, and to seek treatment at the clinic or hospital immediately. And the results findings show that those who are being bitten or scratched by dogs, this is only referring to 40 respondents. Only 15.3% show having good health-seeking behavior after being bitten or scratched by dog. And for those who have not been bitten or scratched by dog, 39.9% reported to have good health-seeking behavior if being bitten or scratched by dog. I'll go to the second part of the behavioral domain, which is to assess the dog owner's ownership and responsibility on pet. I look into the registering dogs with local authority. This one doesn't reflect on the Malaysia population because this is only confined for the dog owners to answer this section. So out of the 238 respondents, only 106, that is 44.5%, registered their dogs with local authority. Meanwhile, only 125, which represent 52.5%, took their dogs for annual health examination. I'll go to the last behavioral domain, that is to identify the dog owners' practices on personal hygiene when they had contact with their pets. Meanwhile, those who do not own dogs, we also look into their practices on personal hygiene when they had contact with dog within the last 3 months. And out of that, the findings show that out of the 235 respondents, 74.9, which represents 176 respondents who clean pet waste, 89.2% reported using protective equipment and wash hands with water and soap. From the 81.1% who reported have physical contact with pet, 98.4% will wash the contact area, and 87.6% will wash with water and soap. As for the non-dog owners' practices, for those who do not own a dog, 4.3%, which is 163 respondents reported have physical contact with dog. 83.4% reported they will wash their hands and body parts, and 71.3% will wash with water and soap. And the main key findings highlight, number one is lower level of knowledge on dog zoonotic diseases and least positive perception regarding the risk factors of contracting dog-related disease were reported among those who are 13 to 19 years old and 70 years and above. Number two is rural population had better knowledge and perception scores than urban population. This is probably due to the husbandry experience that urban population lack. Number three is respondents aged 13 to 19 years are the lowest groups who reported didn't have good health-seeking behavior after being bitten by dog. Number four, majority respondents, more than 88%, reported to have poor health-seeking behavior after being bitten or scratched by dog. Attitudes for health-seeking behavior are better amongst non-dog owners. Hygiene care after handling dogs are good generally for both pet or non-pet owners. As for the recommendations of this study, education on zoonotic-related diseases should focus on children and elderly as they are the most vulnerable group. Emphasis on immediate health-seeking behavior after being bitten or scratched by dog. Change of perception on need to seek immediate health treatment through health promotion, especially to pet owners. Emphasis on registration and annual health checks on dogs for owners, and awareness on Animal Welfare Act 2015. And the last but not least, multidisciplinary collaboration between veterinarians, public health professionals, and physicians under the One Health initiative on zoonotic awareness and education should be strengthened. Thank you.
Dr. Sandy, are you with us? It's all right. So that was an insightful talk. Thank you very, very much, Madam Teresa. So our final speaker today is actually Mr. Tom Hughes, the founder and director of Conversation Medicine and the Malaysian Project Coordinator and a Senior Fellow for EcoHealth Alliance. Tom has started working on zoonotic diseases in Malaysia since 2005. He received his Bachelor of Science in Development Studies and Natural Resources from the University of East Anglia and has a postgraduate diploma in Public Health from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. His current PhD research is focused on concurrent sampling and testing of human, wildlife, and livestock in Orang Asli communities in Peninsular Malaysia. He has designed, initiated, and managed and led collaborative projects on countries such as Bangladesh, Cameroon, Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and independently in Australia and Malaysia. Throughout the PREDICT project, Tom has led a team that has founded 76 novel viruses and 29 known viruses in wildlife reservoirs and people in Malaysia. The impact of his work has been featured on the National Geographic Channel, BBC NewsHour, and in several publications, including The Independent, The Boston Globe, Newsweek, The Daily Telegraph, and many, many more. I'm sure Tom has a wealth of information to share with us. The floor is yours. Thank you. Madam Teresa, could I ask you, yeah, Tom, are you with us? Tom, we are unable to hear you if you're speaking.
Sorry, Farhan, can you hear me now?
Yeah, great.
Brilliant. Okay. Okay, can you see my slides okay?
Yes, it's quite clear and
Brilliant.
great.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. Thank you, Farhan, for the very kind introduction. And I'd like to start by thanking Dr. Nohayati and Dr. Rahani from the Disease Control Division at the Ministry of Health for inviting me to talk today and for their continued support over the last couple of years. A lot of the work that I'm going to talk about today would not have been possible without our colleagues at the Ministry of Health, Perhilatan, Department of Veterinary Services, Sabah Wildlife Department, Sabah State Health Department, and our university partners. I also want to thank MyOHUN for organising this event and inviting me to speak. So I'm going to talk to you today about the threat of zoonosis in Malaysia. As we've already touched on through some of the brilliant presentations today, 44% of emerging infectious diseases are caused by land use change. And if we think about this image up here, which could be anywhere in the tropics, at some point in time, this would have all been lovely, pristine forest filled with wildlife and various vectors all minding their own business. We as human beings, we build a road into here. People come in to clear the trees, to sell the timber, to start agricultural operations. By doing that, we are altering this ecosystem. We are changing the breeding ground for vector species like mosquitoes and ticks. We are increasing contact and conflict with wildlife. People living here are going to go into the forest to hunt, to supplement their diet. The road brings more people into the area and also connects this area to urban areas, which creates a trade, both illegal and illegal of wildlife. So human activities really affect spillover by altering transmission pathways. And understanding that relationship between viral diversity, host diversity, land use change, and human ecology is critical if we are going to prevent outbreaks. So as Dr. Latifa touched on, emerging diseases are a growing threat. Increased deforestation and the wildlife trade are causing more and more zoonotic spillover events. 2 new diseases have jumped from animals to humans every year on average over the last century. Some of them are mild and go totally unnoticed, but others like Ebola and HIV are absolutely devastating. And if we need reminding of that, we're certainly seeing that now with COVID-19. And SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, probably came from bats, most likely a rhinophilus bat. Based on the current modelling, we believe there are about 1.5 million zoonotic viruses still out there waiting to be discovered, and around 700,000 of them could be dangerous to humans. But in addition to the impact on our health, there is the impact to our economies. And these emerging disease outbreaks can have a huge economic impact. The Ebola outbreaks in West Africa in 2016, 2017 cost the global economy $31 to $33 billion, which is a lot. But SARS-CoV-2 and the COVID-19 outbreak has kind of upped the stakes and reminded us of how vulnerable we are. At the moment, as Dr. Latifa mentioned, we've got around 181 million people infected in over 215 countries, with what is being reported as about 3.9 million deaths. But all the evidence suggests that these figures are probably grossly underestimating the true level of infections and the true number of deaths. So the COVID-19 pandemic and measures to slow its spread have so far cost the global economy $16 trillion. And just here, thinking locally about the Asia Pacific region, just in 2020, 81 million jobs were lost, and an additional 22 to 25 million people who were employed have been pushed to extreme poverty as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about COVID-19 because we can't really discuss this subject without getting away from it. As I've already said, the virus that causes COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, probably came from bats, most likely from rhinophilus bats. All credible and peer-reviewed evidence in the scientific literature at the moment supports the idea that the virus evolved in nature. There is currently no scientific evidence in peer-reviewed scientific journals supporting the suggestion of a lab leak as a source of a pandemic, although obviously that is possible because lab leaks do happen. I would just like, the reason I'm talking here about COVID-19 is that I would like everyone to remember that it was 8 years after the SARS outbreak before we understood how it spilled over. And just because we haven't been able to prove the natural origin of this virus doesn't mean that isn't the case. I think one of the most tragic things at the moment, even more so than COVID-19, is the fake news surrounding it and people's preparedness to believe things when there is no evidence to support it. The other thing that I think is interesting is that there is reports starting to come out that there was evidence of SARS-CoV-2 infection in humans before December 2019, when the outbreak was first reported in Wuhan. In September 2019 in Italy, antibodies were found in humans against the COVID-19 virus. And as early as March 2019, sewage water samples collected in Spain have shown to have evidence of SARS-CoV-2 virus in those water samples. So what that reminds us is that we still don't know where it came from. We need to keep an open mind. We need to allow science to continue. And a great loss of COVID-19 would be if we no longer have open scientific communication and collaboration with China, as China is going to be absolutely vital in dealing with zoonosis moving forward. So coming back a little bit closer to home, Nipah virus here in Malaysia. So Nipah virus occurred in 1998. And again, it is driven by agricultural expansion, the need for more pork, the loss of forests, a decision by the LSN farmer, the owner of the farm in Ipoh where Nipah virus began, to plant fruit trees around his farm, to create shade for his pigs, to grow extra fruit, to sell at market and to feed his animals. That very innocent land use change decision meant that bats who were seeking food resources came to his farm, they fed in the fruit trees, they defecated and urinated into the pig pens, and Nipah virus was able to cross over from bats into pigs, and pigs amplified the virus and it went off into people. And it wasn't until we started to see people get sick in Sungai Nipah, 230 kilometers away, that we realized something was going on. And it's worth remembering, in Malaysia, we didn't know straight away it's Nipah virus. Initially, we thought it was Japanese encephalitis, and it took us a long time to work out where it had come from, what was the reservoir species, how it had spilled over. So these things take time, and we need to allow scientists and researchers to take the time to do this work properly. So the most important questions for preventing pandemics, in my opinion, are these. Where will the next pandemic originate? What's causing the rise in pandemics? Which wildlife species harbour the most potentially pandemic microbes? And how can we prevent pandemics, and can we afford it? So this map is a risk map, and the risk of a new zoonotic disease emergence event, which we will call disease X, changes depending on where you are in the world. So on this map, the yellow areas show the regions with the highest, and purple show the regions with the lowest risk. And unfortunately, for all of us in Malaysia, we are right bang in the middle of one of the most riskiest areas. And why is that? In Southeast Asia, we've got high population density, lots of pressure for urban and agricultural expansion, increasing encroachment into forests, which increases contact with wildlife. So what do we need to do? We need to go out and carry out surveillance to understand what viruses are circulating in wildlife and what activities we as human beings are doing, which are allowing them to spill over into livestock and human populations, and eventually, as we've seen with COVID-19, becoming a pandemic. And this is something Dr. Latifa touched on. This map here is the World Flight Plan. And before the pandemic started, at any given point in time, there was 1 million human beings up in the air in aeroplanes. Now, I think it's going to be at least another year or so before we see flights back to this kind of level again. But it's an important point to remember that we are all in this together. It doesn't matter if it's a Nipah virus outbreak in a remote rural village in Bangladesh, or someone in that village can travel to Dhaka, hop on a plane and take that Nipah virus with them anywhere in the world in less than a day. So what's causing the rise in pandemics? So land use change, as I've said, is a major driver of emerging infectious diseases, as is agricultural intensification and the legal and illegal wildlife trade. Over 30% of the emerging infectious diseases affecting people are causally linked to land use change. This includes HIV, AIDS, Ebola, and Zika virus, all which originated in altered forest landscapes. And the main cause of Ebola virus outbreaks has been shown to be wildlife eating and hunting. And again, this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. As we go into pristine areas, open those areas up, we create the mechanisms for these spillover events to happen. The 2003 SARS epidemic started at the wildlife market in Guangzhou in China, where a horseshoe bat in a cage defecated, urinated into the cage below where there was a civet. The civet got the SARS virus, amplified it, and passed it on to humans. The Nipah virus outbreaks in Malaysia and Bangladesh have also been linked to deforestation and land use change, including agricultural intensification. The impact of emerging infectious diseases on human and livestock health is significant, with single outbreaks like the West African Ebola outbreak leading to substantial mortality and morbidity and causing significant economic impacts. And just thinking about here in Malaysia with Nipah virus, that cost the Malaysian economy $550 million US, and we're still feeling the effects of it today. So our next question, which wildlife species harbour the most potentially pandemic microbes? So this map here shows modelling results looking at zoonotic viruses found in mammalian species based on their ecological and taxonomic traits. And we converted this into a map. So what we can see, well, basically all of Malaysia is at risk, as we've already discussed. But as we get into the more internal areas where we still have lots of intact forests, that risk goes up. So we know from the work that we've been doing through PREDICT that rodents and bats are our main source of zoonotic diseases. That's not surprising when you consider the fact that rodents are the largest group of mammals, accounting for almost half of all mammal species. And rodents are host of more than 60 zoonotic diseases that pose a significant threat to human health, such as hantavirus, leptospirosis, rat bite fever, and the plague, to name but a few. And then bats are the second largest order of mammals after rodents. And again, we all know that bats are regularly associated, with zoonotic viruses such as rabies, SARS, MERS, Nipah, and most likely SARS coronavirus 2 that's caused the COVID-19 pandemic. Through the work that we did in the PREDICT project, in Sabah, we found that of all the species sampled, the fawn leaf-nosed bat and Craig's horseshoe bat had the highest amount of virus. We found 17 viruses, 9 of them new, in fawn leaf-nosed bats, and 18 viruses, 8 of them new, in Craig's horseshoe bat. For rodents in Sabah, we found that Muller's giant cinder rat and the white-head spiny rat had the most viral detections. And for Peninsula, we found that cave nectar bats, the Malaysian slip-faced bat, the lesser bamboo bat, and Pipistrellus comorandra, which is the Indian pipistrella, all had viruses, unique viruses in them. And for Peninsula Malaysia, it was, again, the white-head spiny rat was the rodent with the most viruses that we found. Now, I would like to point out that that doesn't mean those are the only species of wildlife we should be worrying about. Over the last few months, we've been sampling at different sampling sites in Sabah. We're sampling different bat species, and we are finding new viruses that we will be reporting to our colleagues in the coming weeks and months. So through the PREDICT project, we sampled over 1,400 people, just under 5,000 animals, collected 50,000 specimens, and we found 76 new viruses and 29 known viruses. Based on current scientific understanding, 12 viruses that we identified belong to viral families that include human pathogens that are potentially of public health concern. However, further characterization of many of the novel viruses we found, including the coronaviruses and paramyxoviruses, is needed to determine their disease-causing potential. This effort is ongoing. It's been heavily delayed by COVID-19, and we're looking to ramp that up again. And one of my colleagues, MyOHUN Lee, is hopefully going to look at doing some of this through her PhD in the next year or so. I want to talk a little bit briefly about Sabah. We found far more viruses in Sabah than we did in Peninsula. We found 8 new coronaviruses, including 3 that are genetically related to SARS and SARS-CoV-2. We found 14 new paramyxoviruses, and we found flaviviruses, enteroviruses, and rhabdoviruses. While in Peninsula, where we were carrying out concurrent orang asli sampling, where we sampled the orang asli, the wildlife that they interact with, and the livestock and domestic animals in their villages, we found 3 known coronaviruses in 15 people and 1 known influenza. We found known coronaviruses in chickens. We found novel coronaviruses in bats. And while there's no evidence at this time to show that any of those are of public health concern, the serology work that we started in 2018 just showed us how much more there is still to do in Malaysia. So I just wanted to show you briefly where we found some of the novel viruses. So this map here shows where we found the 15 novel and the 2 known paramyxovirus. The purple dot here is the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and that's where we found a known human parainfluenza virus in one of our syndromic surveillance patients. The orange dots indicate the sites where animals were detected with novel paramyxoviruses. The green dot shows sites where we did not find any novel paramyxoviruses. And we have a similar map for the coronaviruses. We didn't find any novel coronaviruses in people, but the purple dots indicate the known ones that we found in our orang asli communities. The orange dots indicate the sites where we found coronaviruses in wildlife species. In mid of 2020, we carried out some testing on archive samples collected through the PREDICT project, specifically for SARS-CoV-2, and we didn't find it. So we tested, I think, just over 1,200 samples from 1,200 animals. We did not find any evidence of SARS-CoV-2 in those samples. But that doesn't mean it's not here in Malaysia. We need to do more sampling, and I imagine we will find it. And I think a paper has just come out in Thailand where they found something even closer to SARS-CoV-2 than the previously closest known relative. Another thing just to touch on, one of my colleagues, Jimmy Lee, he completed his master's, and he was able to provide evidence that there was no coronaviruses or other potentially zoonotic viruses in the Sunda pangolins when we sampled them in Malaysia, when they'd been confiscated, but before they'd entered the wildlife trade. And I think it's important to remember that, again, during the start of the outbreak, everyone was fixated with the idea that pangolins were intricately involved in the spillover of COVID-19. And now all the evidence suggests that isn't the case. And it's, again, just a reminder that science takes time, and we need to do these investigations properly and not jump to conclusions. So in May 2017, we started a serology project funded by the Defence Threat Reduction Agency to look at filoviruses and henipaviruses circulating in bats. So this work was done in our orang asli communities, and it was also done in farm communities across the peninsula. We found 2 new paramyxoviruses through our farm sampling, but through the serology work, we found evidence of exposure to henipaviruses and filoviruses in people, macaques, and bats. We found antibodies against Nipah and Ebola-like viruses in bats. For the first time, we found antibodies against Mojang, Ghana, and Ebola antigenetically related viruses in macaques. And we found the first evidence of antibodies against Cedar virus and Mojang virus outside of China in people. Now, we need to interpret these results with caution. I'm not saying that we have one of the African Ebola viruses circulating here in Malaysia. But what this research shows us is that there are more than likely Asiatic filoviruses that have yet to be identified. So this work increases our ability to detect spillover of important human and livestock pathogens from wildlife reservoirs, and will allow us to develop targeted strategies to reduce the risk of epidemics. Serology helps us understand viral spillover and inform zoonotic disease surveillance and research programs. We now need to identify the viruses that may be causing these observed immune responses. In June 2020, together with our partners in Malaysia, EcoHealth Alliance for Conservation Medicine started the Emerging Infectious Disease Southeast Asia Research Collaboration Hub, or EID Search. This is a project funded by NIAID, and as our work and work of colleagues in the region has shown, there is all this evidence of coronavirus, helipaviruses, and filoviruses related to known human pathogens that are circulating in wildlife reservoirs in Southeast Asia. Some recent modelling by EHA estimated that between 1 to 7 million people are exposed to bat coronaviruses every year in Southeast Asia. There's growing evidence that these viruses are spilling over into people and are either underreported, misdiagnosed, or their clinical manifestations and potential to cause pandemics are unknown and underestimated. Oh, hang on. So through this project, we will continue to engage with our Angasli communities we've been working with and identify new communities in Sabah and Sarawak to conduct targeted surveillance. Working with these communities also provides an opportunity to continue education and outreach about zoonosis. And the syndromic surveillance that we started in Sabah through PREDICT will be expanded to new clinical human cohorts in Malaysia to identify evidence of virus causing otherwise cryptic outbreaks. Where viruses are identified, we will attempt to further characterize them, identify likely hosts, and help inform intervention programs. So I'm just going to deviate a little bit for a couple of minutes and talk about land use management. So the Malaysian government has made huge steps since Nipah virus to improve capacity for zoonotic disease surveillance and outbreak response. But improving land use management is also a vital step in reducing the risk of disease emergence and minimizing the potential and economic and public health impacts of land use change. This is something governments around the world need to consider, but for a country like Malaysia that is in an increased risk due to our location and our natural environment, this effort is even more important if we're going to protect the economy, public health, and the environment. So utilising risk maps and modelling proper land use planning tools and environmental impact assessments can help the Malaysian government plan for future development, maximising profits while minimising the risk of disease spillover and the negative impacts of land use change. And through things like the IDEAL project, we saw just how converting land too quickly and in the wrong places in Sabah is costing millions and millions of dollars every year. So by reducing those costs, by utilising better land use planning, we will have more money in the coffers to help us improve disease surveillance, and we will also reduce those negative impacts of land use change. So what do we need to do next? We need to continue training and capacity building for the lab and the field. We need all frontline staff from human, wildlife and livestock sectors to have the appropriate training to work safely. The lab leak theories around COVID-19 have highlighted the importance of conducting zoonotic research while following internationally recognised guidelines for biosafety and biosecurity, so that the researchers and labs can prove that any future outbreaks are not linked to their activities. This is going to be something that funders increasingly demand before supporting research activities. We need to expand One Health training and capacity building across the country and the region. We need all labs and clinics and hospitals to run to recognised standards to protect their staff and the communities that they serve and ensure confidence in results. We need to continue disease surveillance using molecular and serological techniques at high-risk interfaces and in hospital settings. This map here was developed through the Global Virome project and shows areas in Malaysia that we should prioritise for sampling. So the more yellow areas are more optimal and the dark blue areas are least optimal. So this risk map has been put together by, excuse me, based on the number, by looking at the number of unique zoonotic viruses predicted to occupy each grid cell and the relative cost of assessing each site from nearby cities of greater than 50,000 people. So the result is a ranking of all potential sampling sites based on the highest return on investment for sampling in a particular area. So this map shows locations closer to the state capitals have high geographic sampling prioritization. And that's because these are areas where there's lots of land use change, they're easy to get to, we're going to come into contact with the wildlife which we are generally having conflict with. We need to identify which new pathogens pose risks to humans, wildlife and livestock and improve diagnostics. And we need to continue community engagement about zoonoses, the risks posed by contact with wildlife and how to minimise these risks. One of the things that we did through Predict was develop a book called Living Safely with Bats. Anyone that's interested, this is available on the Conservation Medicine website in English, Malay, Chinese, Dasun and Murut. And then just to conclude, what we're talking about here is going to be a huge effort requiring global collaboration. We are only as strong as our weakest link, and COVID-19 has reminded us of that. The rapid expansion of human activities and unregulated agriculture into vulnerable ecosystems not only destroys wildlife habitat and contributes to climate change, it also exposes us all to new diseases such as HIV, Ebola, SARS, Nipah, and now COVID-19. These pressures are only going to increase, leading to more spillover effects if globally we do not change the way we manage the environment and make more informed land use change decisions. When left to live in an environment undisturbed by humans, pathogens have fewer opportunities to encounter their ideal host species, so they often die out on their own. Wild animals like bats and rodents are the natural reservoir for zoonotic pathogens, but they've carried these pathogens for thousands of years. They are not to blame for these disease emergence events. It is humans who are responsible for altering the environment and increasing contact and conflict with these important species. If we continue to grow our cities, expand our transport networks, convert land to agriculture without proper land use planning, prioritising short-term profit over protecting our natural habitat, these events will continue to occur. The rainforest plays a vital role in preventing disease emergence, providing habitat for wildlife away from humans and livestock, as well as regulating the climate, absorbing carbon dioxide, and maintaining the world's water cycle. Globally, we need to strengthen wildlife enforcement networks and improve biosafety and biosecurity at wet markets. We need to greatly increase testing of wildlife, humans and livestock for known and novel pathogens, identify which pathogens we need to be concerned about, and improve diagnostics and treatments for these pathogens. This work needs to be done by people with the appropriate training and utilising the highest standards. While this global effort has been estimated to cost around $6 billion US, this economic cost is nothing when compared to the global economic impact of COVID-19 to date, which is already over $16 trillion. So with that, I say thank you for allowing me to speak and listening to what I have to say. But more importantly, I just want to thank again all of our government and university partners in Malaysia, without whom none of this work would be possible. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So after hearing from Tom, sorry. Okay. For technical issues. So, all right. After hearing from Tom, I hope that we are not too scared to even leave our homes now, with so much threats besides just COVID-19. Okay. Actually, we have been living all these threats all this while, but I believe with good hygiene practices and awareness, most of us would be able to avoid many of the infections. Just that there's a lot of overlap between human, animals, and environmental. So we have to take cautions whenever we make any decisions to engage between animals and humans and the overlapping environment. Right. So we have now, we will start off the panel discussion. All right. So let's start off with Prof. Latifah. people are very interested about One Health. Okay, with the One Health approach to zoonotic diseases, I think we have done quite a lot of activities and interventions, perhaps even changes in policy. A lot of research has been focused on One Health. Have we begun to see any positive outcomes from all these actions that we have taken? And what would be the next? What should we step up on to prevent the next zoonosis outbreak?
Thank you for the question. I don't know whether I have a good or like an excellent answer for that. So we have been working with One Health Malaysia One Health University Network with multiple universities and the ministries. And as a coordinator, of course, my views could be biased. But I am seeing changes in the way academicians teach the students, the future One Health leaders. I'm seeing a lot more interest in non-traditional academicians in non-traditional One Health areas to include One Health into their teaching and trying to emulate some of the training materials that we have given them to make it a model that can be used in a classroom arena. And I am seeing a lot of interest and also changes in the way that the ministries are working. Of course, I'm not saying that it is because of Malaysia One Health University Network. I'm just saying that this could be a combination of encouragement from international agencies and also from people who are interested with One Health. But transformation of workforce takes years, takes a long time. So people have been working in traditional manner for so long that transforming how the workforce interact with each other, it will require additional time, some more training, and also perhaps a lot more collaborative activities, perhaps field activities and simulation activities that really put everyone in the same ground. So communication and then also collaboration and the way people interact with each other between different disciplines and ministries. I think the only way for us to get to know each other is if we were to learn more by working together, and hopefully I hope that our trainings has made a difference, but I cannot quantify how much difference it has made so far. Thank you.
I hope that answers the question from the viewer. In light of the current pandemic situation, I think it's wise for the second question to be COVID-19 related. Thank you, Prof. Latifa. All right, so there has been a lot of speculation whether COVID-19 was a naturally occurring disease. It's been alleged that the virus was created, deliberated act of bioterrorism. So how could we determine definitively if COVID-19 was a naturally occurring or bioengineered outbreak? I think this one goes to Tom. I think, Tom, you're still on mute.
Well, thank you, Farhan. Can you hear me? Yeah, so just to say, I mean, at the moment, there is no scientific evidence to support that claim at all. All of the current scientific evidence, and that is research that has been submitted to journals, that has been peer-reviewed by scientists and then published, shows that the most likely version of events is that this was a naturally occurring virus. Of course, a lab leak is possible. Lab leaks happen all the time. They've happened in China in the past with SARS. They've happened in the US a lot with anthrax, with smallpox, with other things. They've happened in the UK with hand, foot and mouth. So is a lab leak possible? Yes. But based on what we currently know, the Wuhan lab did not have SARS-CoV-2. It had not been discovered. So how could the virus that they didn't have leak out? And as I said in my talk, we need to take the time to do this research properly. It took 8 years to understand how SARS had spilled over. It will take not 8 years, I imagine, but it will take time for us to get to the bottom of what happened. But there is no evidence to support the idea that this was a man-made virus and that it was being created as a weapon. There is no evidence to support that. That is fake news. And I would ask people to look at where are you getting your information from. And there is so much China bashing at the moment by right-wing media in Australia, in the UK, in the US, who want to make this something political. They want to make this a way of beating China. And that is the biggest mistake we could make. We will never get to the bottom of this if we make this about politics. This needs to be about science. We are all in this together.
Right. Thank you, Tom, for that reply. The next of Wilcox. So you have researched a lot on the sustainability of environmental use. So there's a question from the viewer regarding if we, I would say maybe not all, but if most of us switch towards plant-based diet, would that relieve the usage of the environmental resources, and would that also in a way we reduce further interactions or with the environment, or the would we reduce the amount of interaction with wildlife that would possibly lead to jumping of viruses from one species to another, do you think?
Well, let me answer that question. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think it's very much what Tom was saying. This topic related to the climate and whether or not meat could be or should be consumed has become very politicized, just like the origins of COVID-19. And I think I've been involved in this kind of thing for almost 40 years, and in my opinion, this is my opinion, and this is based on the evidence that yes, when it comes to intensive agricultural production of meat, this is problematic. But in fact, even then, the original estimates of the contribution of cattle to greenhouse gases were miscalculated at first by FAO. And those miscalculated overestimates are often used. It was recalculated and shown to be much smaller. But in any case, I think there's a lot of evidence that smaller scale regenerative agriculture, including livestock, can be quite beneficial. And so I don't buy the argument that I don't even know what plant-based diet is, because basically if you eat beef or eat the meat of any livestock, you're eating plants because their diet is plants. So I don't know, the whole planet is plant-based because it's based on photosynthesis. So it's just my opinion that the plant-based diet movement is sort of a fad, and that if you don't go along with it, you might be called a climate denier or something. It's very much like what Tom said about there's this kind of movement right now in the COVID-19 argument that if you are too strongly favorable towards it could have been a lab leak, you will be ostracized, And so he's on that particular subject. He's walking a fine line, I know, because for example, in that case, if it didn't come from the lab, then why doesn't the CCP released all the information from the lab, which they haven't done? So that is a political aspect, which has lent itself a lack of transparency and I would say evidence-based discussion and so on, both in the case of the problem with the origins of COVID-19 and in the case of this issue of plant-based diet, tend to obscure the real evidence. So anyway, that's my opinion about the plant-based diet thing. I will tell you personally, I eat a lot of meat, and I'm a lot healthier. When I was vegetarian for many years, and I switched to range-fed beef that come from a co-op in northeastern Thailand, where the land is managed sustainably, and I'm a lot healthier. So but that's my opinion, and and I'm a sample size of one. Although anyway, that's my opinion. I'd be glad to elaborate further if anyone wants to hear more.
Thank you very much for that answer. And the next question goes to Madam Teresa. Is she still with us? Because I can't see her face. Madam Teresa?
Can you all hear?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is on the rabies in Sarawak. So they are asking, the question is quite straightforward. What are the challenges that's happening in Sarawak now, especially between you and the public in Sarawak, for you to combat the ongoing rabies in Sarawak? What are the main challenges that you face?
Rabies in Sarawak.
Madam Teresa?
May I know which one? Sorry, I'm looking at the questions now.
All right. We filtered it through and we rephrased it. So I don't know whether you'll be able to find it there. So the question is, what are the main challenges that you have faced in Sarawak dealing with the public on the issues of rabies?
Okay, from the study itself, right? The recruitment was proportionate according to the states, but the detailed analysis, despite the higher RSE, showed that the implementation of rabies control program in Sarawak is good based on the participants' response. Yeah.
All right, Manjusa, it's all right. I'll come back to you on that one. I'll send it to you. Dr. Sandy, do we have the next question from the next panelist?
Yes, so we go back to Prof. Latifah again. So one of you will notice that there is a drop in the vector-borne zoonotic diseases in 2020. Is that because of COVID-19 and a reduced number of research on it, or it is a continuous trend with the awareness of zoonotic diseases that led to the drop of vector-borne zoonotic diseases?
My apologies. I'm not sure where the data for vector-borne zoonosis has reduced in 2020. Is that from my presentation? Or is that like a general statement based on the knowledge of the person asking? But what we can do is that I have KKM, people from KKM in this panel with me. Maybe there's comments from KKM on whether true or not in 2020 the vector-borne diseases has reduced in terms of its prevalence. Perhaps Dr. Rohan, Dr. Norita.
Hi everyone. Yes, we do observe similar trend in Malaysia, most probably because of the MCO. People don't go out. As you know that the biting period of dengue is dawn and dusk. So probably with MCO, it successfully reduced the number of dengue cases. Thank you.
That's the answer.
So there's more of the lack of human activities outdoor that perhaps have led to the short drop. So once activities are all we may see the numbers coming up again, as long as the vectors are around and we have not taken sufficient precautionary steps. All right, perhaps next question, Dr. Pran.
I think the next question, since CPRC is also with us, I think one of the members are asking, are there any existing One Health-based policies that focuses on the prevention and control of zoonotic diseases?
Actually, as already mentioned by Prof. Latifah, we have the NSP for zoonosis, National Strategic Plan for Zoonosis, which was developed in late 2019, but then it has not been finalized. More or less, it was based on ASEAN Pacific Strategy for Emerging Diseases, upset, and also MySet, as mentioned just now. And the development of the NSP zoonosis involve other stakeholders like DVS, Wildlife Department, local authority, and of course MyOHUN as the one of the stakeholders. And in this NSP, we outline at least 4 strategies, which is the first one is sharing of surveillance information between all the related agencies, coordinated response to zoonotic diseases, risk reduction, including mapping of diseases as illustrated by Tom just now. And the last one is policy and advocacy. And actually, this celebration or observation for World Zoonosis Day is one of the activities in the NSP zoonosis. Thank you.
We have thank you for the answer. There's a question related to whether there are any specific research being done by MOH or MyOHUN on a specific animal or a specific disease. And an interesting word came up, whether there's any research on lizards or how lizards can actually contribute to zoonotic diseases. Any takers? Prof. Latifah smiling.
I was curious to who the person asking, because that's a strangely specific question about lizards. So there must be some interest about lizards or like some kind of like animosity towards lizards just because there's too many of them.
Hello?
Lizards as reptiles, they do carry zoonotic pathogens. Whether or not those zoonotic pathogens are usually in the form of parasite. In previous studies based on the outbreak that occurred in Pulau Tioman in 2011-2012, a lizard was found as one of the hosts or like reservoir for sarcocystis, so that has resulted in many tourists to become really sick. And once they get back to the country, in Europe, you have multiple cases of sarcocystosis occurring in the European continent. So so lizards definitely is important, mainly parasites, but of course they may carry other zoonotic pathogens as well, as do many other reptiles. Things like salmonella, and if your child, for example, have a pet lizard, you have to make sure that they wash their hands once they touch the lizards, or make sure they wash their hands properly before they eat, because they can be contracting other simple things like salmonellosis, which is a very important bacteria that causes foodborne disease, and perhaps if unlucky can get certain parasitic infection as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Prof. Latifah. Okay, a question for Tom, perhaps. We see that from PREDICT study, and we have discovered so many new viruses. Do you see that? Is it from the human especially? Are we kind of sensitized towards only the local pathogens, or this is especially when you talk about, if let's say in terms of use of vaccines and all that, would people be also sensitized to viruses that are perhaps not yet discovered? Is something that we're thinking about. You get what I mean?
I do. That's a really interesting question, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently. If you look at COVID-19 and you look how it initially affected countries like Malaysia compared to how it then went on to affect countries in Europe and North America, it hit them a lot harder than it hit us. Part of that is because countries like Malaysia actually had plans in place to deal with something like this, whereas countries like the US and the UK, who you maybe thought would have done, didn't have plans in place. But I also wonder whether there is some already herd immunity within Southeast Asia, because this isn't the first time that SARS-CoV-2 has spilled over. And as I touched upon in my talk, we're already seeing evidence that in places in Italy, in Spain, in the US, there was cases way before it was even known to be an outbreak in Wuhan. So I have been thinking and discussing with colleagues, I mean, it is one of the reasons we haven't seen such high death rates and stuff in Southeast Asia is because there is some herd immunity within this population, because this is a virus that our ancestors have already encountered. To you, the question about vaccines, I think it's a really interesting one. It is concerning that most of the vaccine trials, excluding the Chinese developed vaccines, were only carried out on predominantly white people. The world is not made up of predominantly white people. It's made up of people of every race and nationality, as we're all well aware. And we really need to start thinking about this. When we test our vaccines, we need to be testing them on all types of people from all genetic backgrounds. And I think the problems that we're seeing about how they test vaccines then feed over into the problems we're seeing about availability of vaccines, and how we know countries like Malaysia are struggling to get our hands on enough vaccines to vaccinate our population, while countries like the US and the UK are sitting on giant stockpiles which they're not doing anything with. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. And I think that's an interesting point, Tom, you brought up, because I think half the world's population are made up of Indian nationals and also Chinese nationals. So yes, we have to push for more widespread, I guess, clinical testings to ensure that there is a more holistic view on when we actually develop these kind of things. And it's for the betterment of everyone, especially when we touch on the kids and children under 12, as that development is also ongoing. We do have the following question, which is, I believe, for still on Prof. Latifa, very popular today. They are asking whether key elements which are necessarily present in every One Health system programs or intervention. What are the key elements that are necessarily present, that are necessary to be present?
Wow, that's a tough question. I don't think there is like a fix One Health anything that must be in a system or any kind of system that is at a country level. But at the international level, WHO, FAO, and OIE has developed the tripartite guide that kind of like give an example, like a guide, like a guiding kind of like principle on how countries can approach One Health, and trying to include that into the intersectoral collaborative work. But nothing is dictated, like saying that you must have this, you must have that, none of that. What our international organization is also doing is try to encourage the local expertise at the country level, and also, of course, individuals at the ministry to sit together and try to hash out at their own capacity at the local level, like how do they want to do things. And they give tools for this. For example, in the bridging workshop, they try to facilitate ways by which agencies can try to bridge how they work to tackle or to manage an infection, either zoonotic or not, or of zoonotic potential. And then also there's with FAO, there's the joint risk assessment that ministries can use to kind of like do like a SWOT analysis, and also to narrow down gaps, if it exists, on how ministries work together. So there's tools and there's like suggestions and there's some guides and there's some principles, but there's no one is dictating countries to do how you should inculcate One Health into the ministries. Just because I don't think any countries want to be dictated. Each country need to own the process. They need to make sure that, and own the problem. So owning the problem and owning the process a lot of times requires one not to be dictated to do things, especially when it comes to like international organization with a lot of like white people. I'm sorry, Tom and Prof. Bruce Wilcox, but like the yellow and the colored people usually don't appreciate to be dictated too much, and we like to own the process. And it's okay to get expertise to come in to contribute or to guide, but decision has to be ours. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Prof. Latifah, for the answer. So we do not want to leave Prof. Wilcox out of the discussion. He's a wealth of knowledge there. So coming back to the environment. So whenever we have a major projects that involve perhaps chopping down of some forests and involve a large land use. So we understand the need of to gain some financial input for the countries even. So and we have seen environmental impact assessment reports. They have been done, they have been projected, and still at times we felt that the EIA actually helped. So eventually the project would just be a go along. So I know that Prof, you have been on number of technical advisory boards, and so how would you advise the policymakers how to balance between finance and environmental health, that eventually it would impact the possible zoonotic diseases outbreaks and all that? Prof Wilcox?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Yeah, the whole process of environmental assessment or environmental impact assessment, this began in the United States with the National Environmental Protection Act. And unfortunately, it has devolved into something that it was not originally intended. It was intended, the National Environmental Protection Act was actually written by a Jeffersonian scholar, Linton Caldwell, University of Indiana. And it was intended that very much in the spirit of transdisciplinarity and participation, that the assessment would involve true engagement and partnership with the potentially affected communities. But often what happens is consulting firms simply get a large contract. They work with whomever is the project proponent, decide what they're going to do, deal with any mitigations they think they can achieve to minimize the impacts, and then present it to the community without the community really having time or the resources to rebut or consider in any detail. And so this is really what has happened. And I see it everywhere. Of course, I should add that when this began, it began with simply the environmental, which included social impact. And then later, health impact was added. But if you, for example, if you go on to the websites, you go on to ADB's website, you can see documents that point out how these three areas simply haven't been integrated. So there's a really great opportunity, I think I would call it methodological research, to work on how to integrate environmental impact assessment process with health assessment. But really, politics drives so much of this. And really, in the end, governments and wealthy developers do what they're going to do. But it would be good if the process, as it was originally designed, bear in mind that an environmental assessment would require what's called a finding of no significant impact. But you achieve that by working with the community and mitigating any significant impacts. But instead, frequently what is done is they go for an environmental impact assessment or statement, assuming they're going to have impacts, and they don't take the time to work with the community. So, this is what it is. And I've been involved in many of these. And in fact, I battled major agencies who wanted us to change our results. There's a lot of corruption, and I even walked away from a multi-million-dollar project once because I refused to change the outcome, the evaluation or our results. And the government didn't like that because they wanted to please some of the community. And I said, well, I can't change the scientific results. But they put, if I hadn't stood up to them, they would have had me basically alter or falsify our results. And this happens this is in the United States, so you can imagine it happens everywhere. So that's where we are. So it'd be good to idealistically to apply this the way it ought to be applied, in a true participatory way that looks at the real consequences environmentally, not just to local people, but the effects on the loss of, say, natural habitat and so on, globally. But it's very hard to do because of the politics and the money involved.
Dr. Sandy, you have a follow-up question for Tom? I think you're on mute, Dr. Sandy.
Sorry. Okay, can you hear me now? Right. Should be. So Tom, the next question is for you. We have seen a lot of artificial intelligence application that's been applied to research nowadays. Do you foresee more use of AI in research for environmental and zoonotic diseases?
I'm not qualified to answer that question. I'm a Luddite. I struggle to even unmute my microphone. I know nothing really about artificial intelligence. So I don't think I can answer that. But all I will say is, as new technology becomes available, it allows us to do new things and do things better. So, we certainly shouldn't rule these things out. But yeah, I can't say more than that about artificial intelligence.
Well, I'm in engagement with an organization that's very active in AI, something that we can talk about in the future, perhaps.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, all right. So Dr. Pan, do you have any questions?
I think we've gone through some. Excuse me, Dr. Sandy, you were saying?
I will follow up with a question with Teresa.
Yes, please.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Teresa.
Yes.
Yes. So I understand that you do a lot of research on, especially on human knowledge, KAP result. Do you think the general public has sufficient knowledge and information regarding zoonotic diseases? And what else what would the strategy for the country, or perhaps even MOH, to enhance the people's awareness regarding zoonotic diseases?
Oh, okay. I guess from the study done in the study that the National Health Mobility Survey, though the findings show that the knowledge may be high, but it doesn't mean that those who have high level of knowledge practice it, and transfer it into behavioral change. Do I answer that?
Do you see we can develop strategies, or we can inculcate some sort of intervention to encourage behavioral change?
I guess behavioral change takes time. We may have the awareness, but then it doesn't mean that the person, okay, it will help out in behavioral change, but some may have phases of behavioral change. That is the laggards, the early adopters. So it varies on the types of people and the acceptance.
Okay, thank you, Madam Teresa.
Thank you. We have a question from Faiz Ishaq. And this one is specific to Dr. Latifa. Hi, Faiz is a postgraduate student, a doctorate in public health from UKM, currently doing dissertation on the prioritization of communicable diseases using some methodology mentioned by you. Most of the prioritization techniques are semi-quantitative and do not project or predict health burden due to communicable diseases. How can we integrate this method with mathematical models or computer algorithm to help prioritize infectious diseases based on locality for surveillance purposes, co-joint between the Ministry of Health as well as the Ministry of as well as Veterinary Services?
Wow, this Faiz, you asked me the whole thesis question. That's pretty much all your work, right? So anyway, so I don't really have a good answer for you because I'm not a mathematician nor am I a modeler. But I can tell you that the second example that I showed, which is the criteria. What was it? I'm blanking out right now. But the second example, that's not this CDC tool. The second example that I showed you is something that you should look into because it involves a lot of mathematical computation from scoring to ranking, and they do have formulations by which you have to go through and go to that paper. If you have my slides later in the reference section, it's a link to that paper, and you should look into that paper and see how algorithms and mathematical computation can help in terms of prioritize. I cannot even pronounce it now. Making zoonotic diseases a priority. Which zoonotic disease is a priority? Thank you for the question, Dr. Faiz.
Right. I think the next question will be to MOH. There are some concerns about the effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccine nowadays. I'm sure like we are at the initial stage. We will not be able to really test out how effective it is, but in your opinion, is it effective, and are we ready to face the variant virus such as the Delta and all sorts of coming up? Dr. Rohani or Dr. Norita?
Very tough question, and I'm not in any position to answer that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I believe we are still at the very early stage, and there's a lot of information that we need to gather before we can come up with a true conclusion. Okay.
I think going on what the Ministry of Health has said, I think nobody wants to jump to any conclusions before having any kind of data. And I think it's fair for us not to jump into anything for now. We have a question from Justin Wong, Dr. Justin Wong, from Jabatan Kesihatan Negeri Pulau Pinang, up from North, or more fondly known as Penang Island. Thank you to the speakers and organizers and for arranging the NSR CPD points. Hope the organizers can assist in submitting the event to an NSR CPD Secretariat. I would like to humbly ask a question to Dr. Wilcox. In the context of comparing historical knowledge of zoonosis and today, area of 4 Cox postulates still required in identifying modern zoonotic infections, especially viruses, or can we look beyond Cox postulates with modern lab testing? Prof. Wilcox.
Well, we need to look well beyond Koch's postulates, because we know even Koch during his lifetime knew that his postulate was flawed, because obviously you cannot, we cannot culture many kinds of microbes that are disease causing. So this is part, by the way, of the biomedical model of disease, which is, you know, disease agent, infection, disease. And, you know, so this is a very broad question. And I think a lot of the answers are in the chapter that we have in the Handbook of Global Health. And it might be good to bring up the fact that, you know, like with COVID-19, with even dengue and so on, during any outbreak of most arboviruses, most people who are seropositive are asymptomatic. You know, so then we have to ask, what is the cause of the disease? And I think we've gotten carried away with the idea of microbes as pathogens. We even call, I mean, we naturally refer to these things that Tom was suggesting that we find out in nature as pathogens. They're not pathogens, they're commensals for the most part to wildlife. So I think we have to rethink how we think about microbes. And that's what Professor Lederberg was trying to say a decade ago. I hope that answers your question, but I will say this, that what we do know about host parasite relations, and a parasite is a broad term. Again, when we say parasite, we need commensals and things that actually are parasitic and so on, that these are highly coevolutionary relationships, constantly adapting and changing. And, you know, for example, it's extremely unusual for a microbe that's a commensal, say a coronavirus in a bat, to jump to another species and then immediately gain onward transmission between individuals in that species. Because of course, the pathogen, if you want to call it that, or the commensal, is adapted to stay in that host population. So for example, with H5N1, after 16, 17 years, and it having spread all over the world, and there being maybe quadrillions of events of the jumping of the pathogen to different animals and so on, we don't have a single case of human-to-human transmission. What we do have, though, is how this was accommodated in a lab through gain-of-function research about 15 years ago. A lab was able to, in a few months, create a efficiently transmissible H5N1 variant in the lab. So this is something that's very uncommon in nature. And I think if you have, my background, by the way, is I was trained by NIH in genetics and molecular genetics, but I also studied ecology and evolutionary biology. And, you know, my view of the whole thing is that, you know, the real tragedy here is our misunderstanding of our relationship with nature. The unfortunate problem with COVID-19 and the whole idea that we have to go out and gather and sequence and study all these viruses, it's good to do, but it tends to make the public think that nature is dangerous, that dangerous viruses are lurking in all the wildlife. And I think Tom would agree that's not the perception we should have. The perception we should have is we should respect nature, and that the microbial world, we are part of it. Indeed, our cells as eukaryotic organisms, our mitochondria are primitive archaea that evolve with us. So, you know, we're mostly microbes. So this is the point of view I think we need to understand. And in medicine, we're trained to think of microbes as germs and dangerous. But in fact, that's quite rare. And if, like I said, you know, as far as we know, most people who are infected with COVID-19 are mildly or asymptomatic. But that's it's extremely confusing, because in my country, in the US, they're often confusing the infection with the disease. And we know that's not the same at all. And of course, we know that probably this is the first pandemic in the world, much of which the mortality and morbidity is a consequence of the very high frequency of of metabolic diseases, diabetes, overweight, hypertension, and so on. So you really can't. So going back to Koch's postulates, I think we have to reframe everything. And I think, as scientists who have studied these things, we need to, and particularly people like myself and Tom, who also have a background in natural history and environment, natural resources, that we have to reestablish a better understanding of the human relationship to nature. Because nature is not dangerous, but it's to be respected and to work with and live with. But most of the world now ends up living in cities, right? And most of my colleagues who are in academia live in cities. Where I'm sitting right now, 20 feet from now, I have seen monocled cobras in my yard. A monocled cobra can kill you in 10 minutes. But, we work around it, so, and believe me, they're more anxious to get away from us than we are to get at them. So, this whole mentality of pathogens and microbes is dangerous and we have to control them. This is not going to be effective. And this philosophy of top-down management and even manipulate, we have to be really careful about the whole issue of gain of function and manipulating viruses in the lab to make them more dangerous, which is extremely troublesome. I know I can speak for my country. I'm a citizen of the United States. The NIAID leadership, I think, did something quite irresponsible. They went around the protocol and outsourced gain of function research to different places, and they didn't check the biosecurity capability of many of those labs. This is not to say that this came from a lab, but it does remind us that our whole thinking and the way we approach this problem of emerging zoonotics really needs to be carefully weighed, and all these different views need to come into our thinking, which, by the way, is the spirit of, I'll give you a word, it's called epistemological pluralism. That's the idea that everybody's viewpoint and perspective is important. We have to be really careful not to demonize people who have a different point of view, may be different from ours. And we have to be very careful to also represent what our potential conflicts of interest are, that kind of thing. So we have tremendous problems here in terms of conflicts of interest, biases, and so on. And so we really, science deserves to be done in this way. And it won't, and unfortunately, we're at a low ebb with science. We've seen the conflicts of interest that have gone on in articles in the Lancet and Nature and so on. And this is very unfortunate. So if we want to have a balanced approach to understanding the whole nature of germs and disease as originally described, starting with Koch's postulates and on, we need really to remove as much as possible the politics from science. And we need to do this on the basis of the evidence that exists, which is difficult because many of us are conflicted. We get our money from this source or that source or whatever, and we don't want to bite the hand that feeds us. Anyway, that's too much. Thank you for listening.
All right. In the interest of time, we are reaching almost 5 o'clock. So I have a last question for Tom. You still with us? Yes. Right. Okay. So we kind of see a lot of new viruses coming from bats. Would you see bats as the most prolific provider of viruses to human, and as you have discovered many new viruses, are they new as in a way that has not been discovered, or newly developed, or is a newly mutated or modified strains of viruses that has been around us all this while, but because of increased interaction between human, livestock, and animals and wildlife, that kind of further increase the change or mutation in viruses?
Thank you, Sandy. That's a great question. So yeah, obviously bats are a great source of zoonotic viruses, as are rodents, as are non-human primates. And what we've seen is the animals that are genetically closer to human beings, we're more likely to see the viruses that they carry have the ability to spill over and infect us. But no, these aren't new viruses. As I said in my talk, you know, these viruses bats have carried for thousands or tens of thousands of years. And I think, as Bruce was just saying, you know, to the bats, bats probably wouldn't even consider them viruses because they don't make them sick. They're just part of the bat. It's only when we get involved and we interact with bats and we allow these viruses to spill over into our systems that they become a problem. So the real problem in all of this is human beings. I did once propose in a conference at the start of Predict that if we wanted to stop zoonosis, there was one simple thing that we could do, and that's get rid of all the human beings. Just think how great the planet would be without us. Our environments would be pristine and we wouldn't be here to get infected. But that didn't go down very well. Apparently, people don't want to end humanity. But this is what Bruce was saying. We are the problem. It is our activities that are allowing these things to happen. Bats ecologically are hugely important to us. I mean, just here in Malaysia, if we didn't have our fruit bats, we wouldn't have our durian. And without our durian, life wouldn't be worth living. So bats are absolutely vital. It is not their fault. It is our fault as we encroach into their ecosystems, as we increase contact and conflict with these animals. We allow pathogens that they've carried quite happily for thousands of years to spill over, and only then do they become a problem. Does that answer the question?
Yes, Tom, excellent. So, Prof. Latifah, do you have more information to add on? Prof, you're muted, I think.
So actually, I'm interested to hear what Bruce has to say. I'm sure, Bruce, you have been studying evolution of species for a while. So do you have anything to contribute to the question?
About what? The question about what? The can you repeat that?
Can you repeat the question to Prof? Yeah.
So we are discussing about the mutation of viruses. And as Tom research have shown, there are a lot of new viruses. Are those new in a sense that they are completely new, or is actually a mutation of due to human, livestock, and wildlife interactions that increase over the years that led to discovery of new viruses?
Okay, well, you know what I think what Tom said is correct, that these, you know, look at, I'm sure dengue virus, I think, goes back thousands of years, for example, in non-human primates in Malaysia and in Africa and today in humans. It has, obviously, mutation is constantly happening in any organism, including viruses, which aren't organisms, but it's constantly occurring. And those mutations accrue. That's what allows us to use molecular clocks. And that's how we can tell how old a virus is, basically, and how closely it was related to it. But you look at those mutations that are neutral in their effect on the functionality of that particular virus. So mutation is constantly occurring all the time in terms of base pair changes. But as you know, that only a fraction of those actually result in a beneficial change in a particular gene. And so many of them are simply missense or nonsense changes. They have no effect. And so these accrue through so-called genetic drift over time in many organisms, which is a reflection of the size of those populations. So that's what allows us to measure the distances between. But then you can get rapid evolution sometimes when there's a change in selection pressure. So I would say the answer, yes, when we start changing the habitats of wildlife, we're going to alter the selection regime, that is the natural selection regime, and we will get selection perhaps in some cases. But generally speaking, as Tom was saying, you know, it's the virus in a bat or in something else is really continually selected to be adapted to that, you know, to that host, because it's not selective for it to jump to something else. And there are limits to the kinds of functional changes that can take place in any organism. So the evidence suggests basically what I'm saying, and that it is humans that are the problem here. Humans getting in the way, changing the habitat, doing so. We find, for example, that many diseases, many epidemic or epidemiological phenomena occur at the edges of habitat types, ecotones. So you see many infectious diseases, zoonotic diseases, tend to be concentrated at zones of interface between two ecosystems. But generally, and that's where spillover can occur, for example. But mutation, basically, even dengue 1, 2, 3, and 4, they probably haven't changed for tens of thousands of years. There's such a strong selection. They've accumulated neutral changes, so you can measure their divergence from their ancestral viruses. But the word mutation is misused. You can call Darwin called a mutant could be a new phenotypically new organism, but a mutation occurs at the level of base pairs, right? So that's a mutation event occurs because of radiation, or just naturally because of accidents in RNA, DNA transcription, and so on. So I hope that answers the question. It's a tough question to answer, but generally I don't think there's any evidence that there's more evolution taking place. But we don't know for sure. But clearly, if you change the habitat, the population structure, and something about the host, there is the possibility that you could change the genome. There could be selection taking place in the virus or in the microbe, whatever it is, that could be recognizable as a mutant or new variant.
Right, excellent.
Thank you so
answers,
much,
Prof.
Prof. Thank you. So I think we have come to the end of our webinar session. I'm sure there's so many more questions that we want to ask.